Oh, welcome to another episode of the Growth Compass. Shout out to our sponsor senders. If you want to do cold email deliverability correctly, hit the link. But without them, it wouldn't be possible to interview awesome people doing awesome things like John. Welcome.
Thanks very much indeed, Blake. I'm looking forward to the conversation, whatever it proves to be.
Well, before you give a quick introduction, if anybody has come across you on the internet, which I would not be surprised if they have, I think they would find that on the face of the planet, you're the only chief pollinator.
I don't think any longer. I mean, the one thing, if you try new things, then other people, we're heard out. People follow, and I've come across a number of chief pollinators.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I have. So, and I'm,
Oh,
I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I mean, the concept I think is a sort of semi-sound one, and if people want to pick it up and play with it, fine.
oh, good. Well, you're the first one in my horizon, so I appreciate you introducing that to me because I saw that and I was like, I need to talk to that guy. So, but yeah, if for anyone that doesn't know, if you could just give a quick introduction of yourself and what you're
It's
building
sort
now.
of like numbers, and I'm 76 now, and I spent 50
Nice.
years working in the environmental and sustainability space. Almost all of that with business and financial markets. I've set up 4 companies since 1978.
Nice.
They all still exist. The third one, sustainability, which we set up in 1987, is now owned by KKR, which was never the intention.
Yeah.
Private equity group. Um, I've served on over 80 boards and advisory boards, and I've just working on my 22nd book, I think. And some of the books have been very successful. One sold 1 million copies, others have completely bombed. So it's a mixed bag, but it's been fun along the way. I don't know whether that's enough to give a sort of bio, but I mean, I'm sometimes described as the godfather of sustainability, whatever that means. That just in Brazil and has stuck to me like a burr, which I've found very difficult to shake. But
Well, you must have done something in your years of work that is deserving of that title. So,
well,
I
yeah, just very quickly, one thing I did do, and some people on
yeah,
your
let's do it.
know, is in 1994 I came up with the idea of the triple bottom line. So, and the following year, people, planet, and profit, and that's sort of gone into the language. And now there are 10,000 B corporations around the world that are chartered around the triple bottom line. Thousands of companies reporting against that sort of methodology. So, but that for me feels like a very long time ago. But for some people, it's still in there present. Anyway, I'll stop. That's enough. I mean, I'm happy to sort of talk about some of the stuff as we go along.
Yeah, well, that's so. I guess like reading the different things that are available online. So author is absolutely one of them. Like you said, I mean, 22 is more than I knew of, but so but it also seems like serving on boards and running workshops or things like this is accurate to say that I guess the nature of your work overall has been author and facilitator. Or how would you is there even a label that you could, is there a theme
I don't think
through.
there is,
Okay.
except that it's a form of arbitrage in a way. If you can see
Okay.
the future before other people can, and you can introduce them to elements of that future ahead of other people, then there's a business to be made there. And in many
Yeah.
ways, that's what I've done. And I've been very careful through the decades not to stand in the way. I mean, so for example, we work with NGOs like Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth and WRI and others over many, many years, and would try and help business leaders understand what these groups were calling for. And when the companies would invite us in, they'd quite want us to interpret what the people out there, comfortably out there, were saying, and not bring those people inside. And we always said, if you're going to bring us in, we're going to bring them in. And another thing is, if you ever get into the situation, and you're Coca-Cola or you're Nestle or you're Unilever or whatever you are, where you're head to head with NGOs, we will always but always side with the NGOs. Doesn't mean that they're always right, but they are leading indicators of where change is going to take us over time. So so we've had a consultancy business. So I could call myself a consultant
Okay.
But we're probably the only consultancy in the world, I mean, the only consultant in the world who's been sued by McDonald's for 5 months, and we beat them, and three different parts of a
Congrats.
chemical company, and beat all three of them, even at
Wow.
the time when I was working with their chairman, and nobody knew nobody could join up all the dots. So it's an odd game we've been playing, but broadly we're very much pro business. We believe in the right form of growth. We don't believe absolutely in degrowth. We don't believe absolutely in growth at any cost. And which is what we're seeing in many countries now. They're so desperate to have growth to fill their sort of gaps in taxation and all the rest of it, that they want to grow at any cost. And they're stripping back, in my own country, the United Kingdom, for example, stripping back planning regulations, which is I was trained as a city planner, so I mean I'm slightly invested in the idea that if you can think longer term about growth, you can do it more intelligently than if you just crash into the undergrowth and see what happens. But we're at one of these very odd moments where we're all desperately trying to grow, and the people who are growing are the Chinese, who have a completely different model, completely different sense of where the future needs us to go next. So it's I have to say it's a slightly frustrating time.
Well, to inform, I guess, a little bit about that present perspective, that experience that you're holding at the moment. I think there's so many cool things that you mentioned. That you could speak on, and the floor is open for any of them. I would just like to, I think, pick if there are two prior experiences in this field that you've worked on. It could be projects, it could be people that have been particularly impactful to you, or how you see your work, or how you understand the world. Yeah, just two of them to start.
Well, there were so many, and I recently did
Sure.
my 21st book was called Tickling Sharks, and it's
Okay.
basically the
What a
story.
great name.
Well, it was, a lot of the work I've done over the decades has involved getting into very close to very powerful people who do not want to talk to people about the future or a different future than they have in mind. And they
Mm.
certainly don't want to talk to you about environmental or social issues or whatever. And in that book, I tell a number of the sort of war stories that happened along the way. And again, I've always been slightly unusual in the sense that we sign non-disclosure agreements with clients, of course, but I won't say I routinely break them. But I periodically play fast and loose, and in a way, the companies have got used to that, which actually weirdly has resulted in an outcome which we never planned for, which is that those clients that we do work with tend to be much more loyal and to stick with us for much longer than people who just come in through a marketing campaign or whatever it might be. So, and you asked earlier on what label I'd stick on myself, and I spent my entire life trying to resist labels that other people wanted to stick on me. But in a way, I think it's
Except for Godfather of Sustainability,
well,
maybe.
even that. But the one that I haven't really used very much is market activist, somebody who seeks to change how companies think and how they prioritize and how they operate through their supply chains and through the life cycle of their
Sure.
products and services by shifting the market dynamics they're exposed to. And so, for example, if I give you just one example of an
Yeah, that'd be great.
extraordinary company which responded to something that we did in a quite unexpected way. The company was Novo Nordisk, based in Denmark, in Copenhagen. We did a book. I mentioned a book sold 1 million copies. It was called The Green Consumer Guide. That put a real dent in Novo Nordisk's business. They lost a lot of business because they were then producing industrial enzymes that, among other things, went into detergents, biological detergents, and so on. And what other companies were doing at that stage, this was the late 80s, was suing us. And what this Danish company did was completely different. Mads Olesen, who was then their president, basically their CEO, sent two of his people to a conference I was speaking at in London and had them come up to me after I spoke and said, "Would you come to Copenhagen and meet our president?" And I said, "Yeah, of course. I mean, I would be fascinated. I'd known the company for a while. The genetic engineering, biotechnology, really fascinating sector." And so with my co-author and co-founder of sustainability, Julia Hales, who was then probably about 24, we went across. And the president basically said to us, "You can go anywhere in this company. You can talk to anyone you like to talk to, and then come back and tell me what you find." And at the end, we came back and said, "These are the three things we found." And he signed off on all of them, and they all then happened, which was absolutely extraordinary. And for many, many, many years, Novo Nordisk became the leader in sustainability, not just reporting in lots of different areas. So that was an early
Wow.
indication of a new generation of leaders who did not see this as, when I started back in the 70s and I was trying to get into major companies, particularly British and American ones, um, they basically saw you, if you were an environmentalist or anything like that, as a communist. You were anti-growth, you were anti-business, you were anti-profit, you were anti-everything. And so we had part of what I did for many years was just trying to being almost like a CEO whisperer, just trying to get these people to recognize that this was the future, even if they couldn't see it. Well, that was sad, but at some stage, somebody in their role would see it. And now you see, again, you got Trump basically saying, because I can't see climate change, it doesn't exist. And you got the EPA being gutted, and I remember the EPA being founded, and it's a travesty. And yet, this is what the United States periodically does. It goes clinically insane. It did in the McCarthyite period. Here we go again. But this time, what's different is that other countries are moving very fast in the direction that the US used to be moving in, and that
Hmm.
is tech, and it is climate tech, and it is all of these things that are basically tomorrow's economy, which at least the Trump administration at the moment, without going too political, is saying, we don't want any part of that. We want to stay with our sort of gas guzzlers and digging holes in the ground, which
Right,
I
right.
think is a sort of a category error of someone's description.
So with your experience with the Danish company, did that? I mean, like you said, super extraordinary, super impactful. Did that impact uh, your ability to frame what was possible after that point with other companies? Did you see?
Yeah, but in a way, I've always said, and I've always warned um, businesses that come to us, and most of the work comes to us rather than us chasing it around the block. Um, and one of the things I say is we're not like McKinsey. We don't have a toolbox which we just sort of give young people and they sort of take it in and sort all your problems out. And increasingly, funnily enough, we start to find ourselves competing with McKinsey. But our attitude has always been very different, which is that we do not want to parachute in, solve your problems, and then parachute out, nor do we want to be in there forever. What we want to do is to give you an organization, a culture, the capacity to do this for yourselves and the tools to do that so that you don't actually need to have us back in. And yet, paradoxically, that has actually led to this sort of client loyalty and these very long-lived relationships. But part of it, and the Novo Nordisk story showed this in spades in a way, was one of the three things we suggested to Mads Olesen as president of Novo Nordisk that they should do was that we said you should open yourselves up. You're a genetic engineering company. There are people in this world of ours who absolutely hate genetic engineering. Let's invite them in, and we'll hold the ring on that, and we'll do a stakeholder process as we came to call it over time. In the first year, we had 12 people from Greenpeace and anti-genetic engineering groups and so on came, and it worked really, really well. I mean, these people went away thinking, wow, we don't like genetic engineering, but we really like this company. Second year around, I did something that I did intuitively, and this is why I say we don't necessarily have a toolbox, and that was to get the first round participants to invite the second round participants, not us. And what happened on the first day of the group, again about 12 to 14 people,
Sure.
they came to Copenhagen. They were in the hotel. They were in the bar. There was a television screen on. Number one news story on the television in Denmark that evening: an accidental spill of genetically modified organisms from a Novo Nordisk plant in Copenhagen. I mean, if you really wanted to script the worst scenario, that was it.
Wow.
And some of the groups said, "Look, let's just enough. We're going out to the airport and we're going to fly back home." Others said, "Let's call our favorite journalists and blow this thing out of the water." But enough of them said, "No, let's just see what happens tomorrow morning when we go into the company." And the following morning, there was the president and board members and directors and about 60 to 70 Novo people, and then there's 12 or 14 outsiders or visitors. And I was basically moderating, facilitating the process. And somebody got up, who was the director, who was responsible for all of this sort of stuff, who was it's a deadly combination. He was both a lawyer and an engineer. He
Oh
stood
man.
up. He stood up on the stage and basically started to say, "Don't worry your pretty little heads about this. It happens all the time. Get used to it." And I had this fraction of a second. I was sitting in the front row, trying to work out, what do I do? I walked up on stage. I picked him up by the scruff of the neck. I took him off the stage. He never ever forgave me, not surprisingly. And there was a young woman who was at that stage in marketing, Lisa Kingo, who later on ended up on the board of the executive board of Novo Nordisk and ended up running the Global Compact. And I said,
Wow.
Lisa, come up here and take over and just tell the story as you see it. And she did. And at the end of what she said, which was completely on the fly, she said, "What do you want?" And one of the visitors said, you treat customers with the greatest of respect. Treat us as a new class of customers." And she said, "We'll do that." And they did that. And because of the way that the company responded under a certain amount of duress, that second group of people went away even more impressed by the company. But it could have been absolutely catastrophic. And so when I talk about being an activist, I'm not neutral in what I do. I try to be objective. I try to be professional. But
Mm.
I always say to client companies that we work with, I'm trying to be neutral in 15 years from now, 10, 12, 15 years, but in the future. And I'm trying to bring that world back into your world in a way that you can sort of see it and begin to respond to it. And getting those NGOs and campaigners and activists in was just one way of doing that. And over time, we also brought in people who also played environmental safety, health, environmental or
Yeah.
sustainability roles in other companies. So you started getting this sort of dialogue going.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. So I genuinely appreciate you walking through the how everything happened with that company, because a lot of times, which and they're still valid, but a lot of times, on conversations on this podcast come down to what problem are you solving, what are your markets, like what are your strategies, how are you serving your customers, things like that, which are very important, very difficult to solve. But what you're speaking on are very more abstract, ethereal things, which are like politics, like how to build a culture, how to manage people, PR, these things really matter as far as like, how they impact your ability to even execute on a growth strategy if you have one. And so I know that you mentioned, not having necessarily a toolkit that you go into these engagements with, but from what you just outlined, because what you just described, this evolution from talking with important stakeholders, identifying them, bringing them together, creating an ability for this company to move forward,
Yeah.
prioritize sustainability and grow. Do you find anything from that experience that you just went through as specifically applicable to any of the companies that you either are or aren't working with at the moment? Like how much of that experience is you know,
All
you
of
could
it
take
and
a
none of it.
framework, I
I
guess.
mean, in some ways, Blake, I think several things. One is that I still work with a number of major companies, but over time, I've started to work with smaller, not startup, but early stage growth, later stage growth companies. So I'll give you two examples. One is in Israel, which is a horrible story at the moment. But and in fact, this particular company was operating on a kibbutz that was hit by the Hamas
Wow.
breakout, and they lost three of their employees. Two of them were killed in front of their children. So I mean, I could go political. I'm not going to go political, but
Okay.
this is a company that, if you've been to that part of the world, you'll have seen towns and villages with this great stream of domestic waste going down the hills around the settlements. This company, UBQ Materials, can take that stream of debris and turn it into useful materials. When I first visited them at that kibbutz and at a manufacturing plant there, the material smelt peculiar. It doesn't smell now. It was only in one color, brown. It's now in any color you want. And so I've seen. It's not that we need a lot more polymers in our world, but if you can, because you've got this whole global plastics treaty being negotiated at the moment. But they've been an example of a company who've had this idea. How do you take waste and turn it into something useful? Have raised hundreds of millions of dollars. I just recently visited a big new plant of theirs in Europe. And what they're looking for, I'm there on an advisory board alongside the previous environment commissioner of the European Commission, the previous administrator, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, these sorts of people. And another example would be in Spain, a group called Matiga Solutions. They're based in Barcelona. They're a spin out from the supercomputing center there. And what they do is risk modeling. Whatever your asset, it could be a factory, it could be a bit of infrastructure like a highway network, it could be a residential property, a sort of skyscraper or whatever. Um, they can model the climate risk for that at a drop of a hat. And so, in different ways, I'm starting to work with people who are more directly part of the solution than some of the very big companies are. I mean, one of the companies that we're working with, which is big, but is also part of their solutions landscape, is Acciona, again based in Spain, and they do infrastructure, water, sewerage, power. They do renewable energy, um, but it's an interesting company because they've got a sort of family ownership element still. And one of the things I've discovered over time is that if you find yourself working with a company with a degree of family ownership, they can very often, and they will, think longer term than publicly listed
Wow.
companies.
That's interesting.
It's also true of Novo Nordisk because they're not family owned, but they're owned by a foundation. And the foundation, in a sense, is a sort of fire break on the mad enthusiasms of financial markets and so on.
So so with these three companies, I've heard and I follow Matiga Solutions. I think they're a really interesting company. I think
Yeah.
they're really cool. With those three companies that you mentioned, I don't know how easy it would be to draw comparisons between the three. But as far with this concept, I mean, I enjoyed that we're kind of at a higher level of abstraction um, with this type of question. But with these types of companies doing impactful things, taking debris, making it useful, risk management as far as climate goes, is there just as much management of culture, stakeholders, meetings, facilitations, these types of higher level abstract things that make them
Yeah.
successful, or what makes them successful in being able to continue to grow and simultaneously do things that are impactful for the climate?
Well, I think they do need less stakeholder engagement because if you're a very big company with a big um, historic legacy and all sorts of problem products and all along the way, you're going to have to manage your stakeholders fairly actively, external ones particularly, over
Okay.
over a very long period of time. Most of these smaller companies don't have that problem, at least not yet. And so what they're looking for is people who can bring elements of the outside world into them. I'll give you another example. I mean, in Paris in 2007, I joined the advisory board scientific committee of something called EcoBadis. And that was then 6 or 7 people. They're now 1,700 people. At the time, they were tracking about 100 companies. They now track
Wow.
130,000 companies. And they're a supply chain management platform, and they help companies of all sizes, but particularly large ones, to manage their supply chain issues. So in a sense, it is a form of stakeholder engagement. They have an annual conference where they bring all the disparate people in this landscape together, distill what they want, feed that into their algorithms, feed that into the processes within the business. But I can't say that every organization I've been involved in has seen that sort of growth rate. In fact,
Sure.
many of them have burned out. I mean, sort of crashed and burned. And to the question you were about to ask earlier on was, are there commonalities, common patterns
Yes.
between these companies? I think for me, one of the things I like most is people who are prepared to take risks, not just talk about it, but to take risks. Not insane ones necessarily, although some have done that, or what was thought to be crazy. Um, and sometimes that'll take me into the world of social enterprise. I mean, people like Mohammed Yunus, for example, who set up the Grameen Bank, and I worked with quite a number of social entrepreneurs over the years, and I love what they do. But instinctively, intuitively, by experience, I'm most interested in market-focused, market-oriented companies. That it's just where I feel um, most comfortable, and the help that they need changes the whole time. I mean, for example, Matiga just this morning were in touch saying, would I speak at something in Paris in September with some of their big funding group? Unfortunately, I can't because I'm speaking in Madrid on that day. But
Oh
but
man, what a conflict.
no, but these things happen. But some of it goes into a meeting, and you have a good discussion. You visit a site, you ask questions that other people might necessarily ask, but some of it's just on the fly. Can you come help us with this? We're doing a client presentation. Can you help us with that? So it's and that's part of what I like which is the unpredictability. A lot
Well,
of
so
work.
so the as far as a commonality between somebody, let's just say a company doing something innovative, challenging, something that will really move the needle, and something that's environmentally impactful, you think one of the things it comes down to is the people that are the team and their appetite for risk. Is that something you'd say?
Well, I mean, as you were saying that, Blake, what came to mind was somebody. I mean, back in 1977, I visited one of the world's largest holes, and it's a hole in the landscape in Cornwall, down the southwest of England. It was a china clay mine, and I visited it to write for one of our science magazines, New Scientist. And I'm not a scientist, but I wrote for some years around scientific subjects. It never occurred to me that vast hole in the ground, which somebody was trying to sort of reclaim with a few goats and so on, because the huge great waste tips had been created, and they're extremely dangerous. And there's just been a recent disaster in Wales of that
Okay.
sort. Never occurred to me that somebody from the rock and roll industry would walk into that. Well, first a nearby site, some old abandoned gardens, but then into this hole and create the Eden Project. And the Eden Project has now brought something like £2 billion into the regional economy,
Wow.
well over 20 million visitors. It's just set up a new Eden project in China. It's got ones happening in the Gulf. There's one in the north of England. I think there's one in Alaska. There's one in Costa Rica. And Tim Smith, who's the guy who's driven that, is, I would say, one of my closest friends. Um, but I've just been fascinated to watch him as he's done what he's done. And there was a moment where I think he said this in public, but where they were aiming to get some very big charitable funding in the early days of the Eden Project. And he went up to London to be told that he had got it. But instead, he was told that they hadn't got it. So what did he do? Well, he went back to the Eden Project, stood on a table, and said, "We've got the money. Off we go." Well, if you're married to somebody who's completely delusional or whatever, it could be a problem. But in that particular case, people believed and people acted, and the thing happened, and they got the money in the end. But it's people like
Wow.
that who I don't know what it is. I mean, my father was in the Air Force, and he was a mutant, and I could never have gone into any of those armed forces, those worlds. I've always been a mutant of mutants, and in a way, what I've done throughout my working life is seek out people like that, because very often they're the ones the unreasonable people, as George Bernard Shaw called them, who do end up changing the world.
Well, thank you, John. That is a really beautiful way to visualize and wrap up. I think a lot of what we are talking about. I'm excited for your answer, and I do have one. I guess it kind of is one and a half questions
Oh dear.
uh, left for you, but the last time, you're doing a lot of great work. You've done a lot of great work. You've seen a lot of things. You have a lot of information at your disposal about what has happened, what hasn't happened. All of these different things that you've done, and I'm curious what inspires you at this point.
Well, I think a lot of things inspire me, thank heavens, in the sense that young people and their enthusiasms and their attempts to make things better, I find that immensely inspirational. But it's odd. I mean, as I said earlier on, I've been 50 some years in this space now, but I feel I'm only just getting started. And I think the next 10 to
Love that.
15 years will see more change for good, bad, and ugly than the last 50, because we're going into one of these inflection points. And, Trump's um, denial of that future is coming at the point where it's going to cost the United States so much. Geopolitical and macroeconomic um, value and positioning, and so on. So I don't find that inspiring. I don't particularly find the Chinese, and I've worked in China, always inspiring. But if you look for a country which has decided to control the commanding heights of tomorrow's economy, rare earth minerals and metals, solar wind battery, electric vehicles, drones, robotics, precision fermentation, you name it, artificial intelligence, they're in there, and they're doing their absolute damnedest. So suddenly you have DeepSeek saying, we can do this at 1/10 of the cost that you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
all of this, and incidentally, we can do it at 1/10 of the energy footprint. This is becoming really interesting, this space, and so almost regardless of what happens in the United States, but I do hope it recovers its sanity, because it's a crucial, pivotal country in all of this, and pivotal economy, of course. Um, I just think this is such a fun time to be alive, and so I get inspiration from that as well.
Well, I love that. I really appreciate that answer. I think at any moment in time, you can choose inspiration. You can choose to be discouraged. So I appreciate you choosing inspiration. My half question left for you is, I believe on two of your sites there's a bird here. I believe it's either a goose or a swan. Am I right?
So there would be a green swan.
Yes.
That was a title of. Oh, is this the flying one?
Yeah. Well, I believe on Volans and your personal website. Let's
Okay,
see.
on the personal one there it says
Oh, Volans is a hummingbird.
that's a hummingbird. Yes.
Nice. Okay. Yeah. So what's the story with that? Is it just cool, or is there
I
something deeper there?
sort of I like wildlife. I like nature. I like birds, and the hummingbird is just this extraordinary creature. And I've been on the Pacific Northwest coast of the United States and places like Mexico, and I've seen these things, and you've seen them, and they're so fast, and they're so
Yeah.
agile, and they consume so little energy from flowers, and yet have this extraordinary cross pollination role. And so when I was thinking about the cross pollination role, obviously bees came to mind and so on, but
Yeah.
I thought most people would find a hummingbird slightly more appealing
Yeah.
than bees. But I happen to love honeybees as well.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And the green goose.
Well, it's a green swan, and the idea
Swan. Yeah.
there was that there's a guy called Nassim Nicholas Taleb, and he came up with the idea of the black swan. Black
Ah,
swan is
yes.
something that comes completely out of the blue, takes everyone by surprise, has a massive impact, and afterwards people sit down, scratch their head, and think, "Oh, why did that happen? Let's make sure it doesn't happen again." But they don't learn the right um, lessons. And so I thought, well, what if you had something like that, but which was very much in the clean tech space, very much positive. So it would be a green swan, but it was all
That
the positive and solution stuff. So anyway, that book, Green Swans, came from that, and that image was developed by a Russian friend of mine Brazilian friend of mine who lives in Russia. What an interesting world we live in.
That's beautiful, John. That is wonderful. Thank you for continuing to push these ideas into the world. Thank you for taking the time to push these ideas out in this conversation together. If anybody else is inspired to follow along or get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
The simplest way is email. I'm afraid I'm on LinkedIn and all of these other social media platforms, but email is John at Volans Volans.com, and I answer
Awesome.
every email.
We'll do it. This is a once in a lifetime chance. Reach out. Chief
It's
Pollinator.
I take up those sorts of invitations. It's amazing how many people just don't. But I'm here
Yeah.
should anyone need me. And Blake, again, thanks hugely for the conversation.
Absolutely, John. Yeah, thank you so much. Bye bye.
Thanks.